Welcome to the Roetzel HealthLaw HotSpot. HealthLaw HotSpot is a podcast for physicians and health professionals that covers the legal issues and trends that affect the healthcare industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the HealthLaw HotSpot. Today, we're going to be talking about doctors' reputations and how the use of social media today by patients can have a really big impact on what people are reading online about a particular doctor or his or her practice. I'm really excited to have two of my colleagues here with me today. First, there's Marc, a shareholder at Roetzel and Andrus and part of our litigation department in the Chicago office, and Julia Mohan, also in our litigation department in Chicago as well. And I really appreciate them both being here today. And this is a topic that we've all worked on together. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Ericka.
Well, so first, why don't we start by just saying that according to medical economics, about 65% of patients are choosing their physicians based on what they read online. And like anything else in social media, not everything you read online is true. But when it comes to reputation for physicians, misinformation online can be a real problem. So when you Google a physician and you see somebody saying that doctor was terrible, or that doctor did this, that doctor did that, it's hard to know what to believe. And some of it can be very harmful to a physician's reputation. So one of the first things I kind of wanted to have you explain is what kind of comments can people make about physicians online that physicians can really even do anything about to begin with? So Marc, maybe you could tell us that.
Sure, Ericka. Well, you're totally right that today online reviews of doctors really influence where people decide to treat. And so when patients make statements about doctors, it can affect their livelihood, their practice, the amount of patients that they get to see. So sometimes it becomes problematic if a patient is putting things up on one of these informational sites or rating sites that are blatantly false and that can be malicious and can be very detrimental to a physician's reputation and ultimately to their livelihood. On the other hand, patients just indicating that they don't care for the doctor's personality, they think that they rushed them, they thought their office staff was inefficient or something like that, is just opinion, and it's totally legal, it's totally proper, and it's probably what these websites are in existence for. However, it crosses the line when patients make blatantly false accusations about physicians that impugn their professional ability or their ability to treat patients. And so we, as you know, we've been involved in a number of cases where patients have made systemic complaints that are absolutely false, that disparage doctors, indicate that they've committed malpractice when it was untrue that they had committed malpractice, and also made blatantly false statements that have affected a doctor's livelihood by reducing the amount of referrals that they receive from the internet and from these reputational sites. So it's a big issue out there today.
So in terms of defamation, if you're saying something like the doctor has a bad bedside manner, or the doctor made me wait in the waiting room too long, or things like that, those are very different than saying the doctor, killed my mother, the doctor did surgery on the wrong body part, the doctor failed to diagnose me. Those kinds of things, there's a distinction. Having an opinion is going to be something where you can absolutely have it, but stating something that is false is really the line between where the doctor can take some action or not, correct?
Right. Under defamation law, truth is an ultimate defense, and also an opinion, whether it's truthful or not, if it's simply an opinion of the speaker, it's not actionable as defamation. However, if somebody makes a statement on one of these websites that's blatantly false and again hurts the reputation of the doctor, then that can definitely be actionable under defamation law, under slander and libel laws, which are kind of all grouped into one basket, which is really disparaging remarks that are false. And so, as you know, Ericka, we've represented doctors where, again, your example, where they've said that the patient says that the doctor operated on the wrong appendage, which was absolutely false. The doctor looked through his records. There never was an allegation of malpractice. There never was a patient, that described what happened on their website, and it was just completely malicious. And so, in that situation, the doctor was very upset that this was hurting his reputation. Clearly operating on the wrong appendage is a very big issue for an orthopedic surgeon, and he felt that it had hurt his reputation. And furthermore, when they looked through the records, the patient's name appeared to be false or fictitious. So it was the belief that this was really somebody that was trying to malign the doctor, that was not being truthful. They couldn't find records to back it up. And so they hired our law firm, and we actually went through a number of steps, both using some computer forensic techniques and the subpoena powers of the court. And eventually we had uncovered that the poster of that malicious review was in fact a disgruntled vendor, of which the physician had canceled his contract with them. And this was retaliation against the doctor. We sued them. We sued them for slander, and ultimately we settled with them and forced them to take down these absolutely false and very harmful reviews that were made against the doctor.
Well, and that was a really, interesting case that we worked on. So I want to take a step back, because one of the first things that happens is the doctor is informed that there's something negative online about that. Maybe another patient or doctor tells them, maybe they've hired one of those companies to kind of monitor the reviews that are out there. And so their first inclination is always to respond back and say, that's not true, or that's not how it happened. And of course, from a healthcare perspective, we don't want doctors responding online to anything, because acknowledging somebody's your patient can present HIPAA issues. And how you should respond, if you're going to respond at all, is a bit of a different topic. But let's say you have identified a bad review and it's completely false, and it's not just an opinion. What we want to do then is figure out, is this person a patient? Is this person not a patient? So maybe, Julia, you can talk a little bit about what to do once you see that somebody has done something, and maybe speak to the difference between when we know who it is and we don't know who it is, and what the next step might be.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Oftentimes people, one of the positives and negatives of the internet is you can post things anonymously, or you can create a name or an email that you post from, and it might not tell you the true poster. We have had cases where people used their real email address, which made things much easier. However, it's quite common for people not to do that. And it's a multi-step process in order to ascertain who is actually doing the posting. And oftentimes the doctor might have a suspicion, but that's not really enough for a lawsuit. The first thing that we would do is you issue a subpoena to the website where you can see the post. And that website should be able to identify the IP address of the poster. The IP address is a way of identifying the computer or the device that the post was made from. The second step then would be to issue a subpoena to an internet service provider associated with that IP address, right? So you're actually doing two subpoenas, first to the website for the IP address, and then to the internet service provider, your Comcast, your Sprint, to give you the subscriber information associated with that IP address. And that's where you get the identifying information of the person who made the post. One thing, though, to keep in mind is you sort of have to act fast. The internet service providers, your Comcast, your Sprint, often give what's called a dynamic IP address to a device. So my phone could have an IP address associated with it for a week, a number of days, and then it would have a new one. The ISPs often only keep their records now for about 90 days or 120 days because they're constantly changing these IP addresses. And so in order to get that subscriber information, you really have to act fast in issuing these subpoenas to get the information you need and find out who made the post.
Wow. So once we get the information, what can we do with it? I guess is it assuming we act quickly enough.
Yeah, there are a couple options. Um, a strongly worded letter from a lawyer is often effective. Even aside from what you said of having a doctor respond to online, you always want to be careful, even outside the healthcare setting, of having a response. Somebody malicious could take a response and just repost it, right? And essentially get in a battle of words online, which we want to avoid. But a letter from an attorney can be effective. Often what also works too, filing a lawsuit. You can file a lawsuit for defamation, because if this is harming the business or impugning the doctor's ability to do his job, there are consequences for that. There is another measure too, often notifying the website of this. Often these posts will violate their terms of service. We had a lawsuit one time, Marc, where a person was posting repeatedly. And once we made the website aware of that, they took action. They noted that these were repetitive. They were coming from the same IP address. And so those were violations of terms of service. They weren't intended to just be a forum for duplicative finger pointing reviews. So there are options.
Many of the websites also, so in their terms of service, they do not allow false statements. So sometimes if you can prove, for in the example of you've done a review of your patients and you can't find a patient name that matches the name on there or the type of procedure that they're alleging, so it appears to be completely fabricated. If one of the terms of service is on the website that you can't post false, misleading information or false reviews, just by sending a letter to the website and providing them with evidence that the post is false and malicious, they may take it down. Some of these review sites are very responsive. Others will not respond unless you begin taking formal action against them, bring them into lawsuit, issue subpoenas, get their lawyers involved. And all of a sudden, sometimes you'll get more of a response once their legal teams behind these websites approach you. But sometimes it's even difficult to find an address or a way to contact the legal representatives of these websites, because again, they're boards in cyber world. So a lot of times it's just a challenge to get to somebody who has responsibility for the board and their legal representative. So those are all issues, but sometimes it can be very effective if you can prove to them that somebody is doing something malicious. Often it's a violation of their terms of service, and they'll take it down.
Right. And a lot of times when we know who the person is posting online, and it's something about the office, like, they said I didn't pay my bill when I did, and we know it's not true. Obviously, the office of the doctor can certainly reach out directly, not mentioning anything online, of course, and work something out for that person to take the information down. But you're absolutely right, Julia, that, I've had situations where somebody tried to do that, and then the patient started posting those discussions online, and people were choosing sides. That brings a lot of bad attention to the website. Doctors don't really have time for that, of course, and nobody really wants to get into that. Some doctors might choose to just not allow comments on sites that they can control, but certainly you can't do anything on the health grades and the Yelps of the world, right? But when it comes down to it, doctors do have a couple of different options. One is, does this really matter? If you've got 5,000 five-star reviews and one small one, there's also a matter of, do I want to put time, effort, and money into fighting about this? And that's a really important decision, because this can be an expensive process and the outcome can be uncertain. Whether you get the information in time, whether you can figure out who it is, etc. So the outcome is somewhat uncertain. You can always invite patients who are happy with your services to post positive reviews instead. But
another issue, Ericka, that always has to be kind of when you're talking about a lawsuit, you always need to kind of evaluate what the ability is ultimately of the potential defendant to pay a judgment or award, or whether they care, right? So again, in the situation that we had before, where we had a provider of medical equipment to a practice that was then making these posts and was malicious, we went after them. We filed a lawsuit against them, and ultimately they wound up paying our attorney's fees, and they paid a settlement fee because they had assets and the ability to sustain a judgment if we got a judgment against them, which we probably would have based upon their false posts. But the majority of the people that post maliciously, sometimes they have mental illness, sometimes they're just members of the public, and they don't really have assets or money so you have to decide what is your approach. You can possibly get injunctive relief. You can get a court to order that the post be taken down, but sometimes it's quicker and easier, again, as we talked about, to go through the website to get it taken down. If you have a desire to get an award of money for the damages caused to your reputation or to your practice, or even the legal fees that you spent identifying the person and then tracking it down and proving that it's false, you always have to be aware of, is the ultimate defendant collectible in any lawsuit, but in particularly these lawsuits. You really have to take a good look at that before, as a physician, no matter how wronged you feel, before you want to invest, tens of thousands of dollars, to identify these people, to subpoena the various internet providers and the websites, and then file lawsuits and get people served and then commence a lawsuit. It could cost a lot of money. And you really need to evaluate what your goal is, because if you think you're going to get your money reimbursed, the majority of people that are making these posts are not financially capable of giving you any kind of compensation. So you will have spent a lot of money. You will ultimately get a judgment and prove that you're right, and possibly get an injunction or get the site to take it down. But it's highly unlikely that you may recover any money. And that's something that you always have to consider when you're bringing a lawsuit against somebody.
I think that's a great point. And what I was going to ask is, let's say your reputation is damaged, in your opinion. How do you go about showing that you were actually damaged or what the harm is? And is that kind of a hurdle that can be really difficult to overcome?
Well, the law in Illinois actually tries to make reputational damage to your business easy to recover. So under the defamation laws, they have a thing called libel per se or slander per se, whether it's written or it's oral. And the per se means that it's assumed if you fall into a certain category of slanderous conduct or defamatory conduct, that damages are assumed. And so one of those areas is if you make a false statement about someone's business acumen or their ability to perform as a professional or in the realm of business, to disparage them as corrupt business people or incompetent professionals. And so the law assumes that you have been damaged, even though it's difficult to show what the actual damages are, right? I mean, it would be hard to say, oh, I lost 100 patients and I would have gotten, $100 per patient and come up with the calculation. So the law assumes that you have been damaged, whether you can actually show damages itself. And then there's kind of a complex, kind of very loose procedure for proving to a judge actually what your harm is. And it's based upon what your income is, what your stature in the community is, and a number of factors. They're kind of amorphous factors. And the court or the trier of fact, whether it's a judge or a jury, has to come up with a dollar amount. And it's not necessarily doesn't have to directly correlate to the amount of money you've lost. Although, I mean, at some point it's got to be attached to some economic factor, but it's rather vague. And again, the same problem is, depending on the judge or the jury, you may feel that you've been terribly harmed, and they may think that it's rather minor and not award significant damages. Or on the flip side, the trier of fact or the judge could come to the conclusion that this was a terrible thing to have done to your reputation and could give you millions of dollars in damages, assuming that they're collectible again. So, I mean, the damages are all over the map, and it's kind of on a case by case basis. But the law assumes that if you just disparage somebody's business, that they have been harmed, and then the trier of fact or judge has to go about figuring out how you should be compensated.
Right.
It's interesting. It's different than other damages contractual damages, are usually very certain. I was supposed to get paid this, I didn't get paid that. And so the difference between what I got paid and what I didn't get paid is your damages, which is very, it's something that can be easily calculated. In this area of law, it's much more vague and subject to the kind of how negative the comment is, and what profession you're in, and how reputation affects your ability to work.
Right. And I think a lot of people feel like they can hide behind the keyboard, not just when it comes to reputation, but just in general. I mean, anytime you're online, kind of shocking some of the things people will put out there. And I think, just as an aside, doctors are pretty high income earners, and, sometimes they don't display great behavior either. So just to your point that, doctors, if they're the ones who are posting things online about other doctors, whether they're competitors or something like that, which I've definitely had a couple of cases like that, the doctors also need to understand that they're actually pretty good targets and very worthwhile targets for lawyers to go after if they're making statements that are false or untrue. I just thought that's really kind of circular thinking. Nobody wants to be the target of it, but if doctors who have deep pockets are the one making these statements or trying to hurt a competitor, then they should be careful as well, because the same logic that you've discussed here applies to them. I would think
that we've been involved, Ericka, just on that point, just follow up on that point, that we've been involved in cases where actually competitors in the dental field and other fields have posted negative comments on other doctors for the purpose of getting a competitive advantage. And in those situations, the courts will not look very favorably on that. In addition to being defamatory and having this per se assumption of damages, which is left in large part to the judge or the jury. In addition, there are statutes about unfair competition and other statutory penalties that come with punitive damages, attorney's fees, and other things if you're doing it for competitive advantage.
Wow.
So it's a very dangerous thing to do, and there could be very significant penalties, as well as professional, I believe that the professional licensing boards also would probably take on this issue. I don't know if there's really been anyone that's lost their license on it, but to me, it would be an issue. Certainly
professional conduct for sure.
Right, for dental boards or medical boards, if people are engaging in this kind of conduct. So it's all things to consider.
That's actually a great comment. Do you find, Julia, that people are more likely to want to settle this when they first are contacted? Do they recognize that it's going to be less expensive and easier, or do they typically put up a fight thinking that it can't be proven?
Well, with knowing that you're being malicious or saying false things, you're not going to find that people are going to dig in their heels and fight quite as much, because they can't back up what they're saying. This is very different than a lot of fights where both parties do believe they're in the right. I think a lot of parties are surprised that they could face legal action. I think they are accustomed to the notion that you can say whatever you want online without any, with impunity. And so once they are approached with a letter from a lawyer or with service of process, I think they are more likely to engage. They're unhappy about it, but it's not really proper to dig in your heels if you have nothing to back it up.
Right. And I think some of the cases we find most of these postings are done in the middle of the night, off hours. People have claimed, I was drunk when I did that. So, they're not on their best behavior. They recognize it as well. And it's like one of those things where you're kind of caught red-handed, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of times doctors really just want things taken down. They aren't necessarily looking for money. They just want it to go away and to, they're not really looking for a big payday, which I think can help make it a quicker issue to resolve.
Right. Both parties, I think once you get to that point, just really want to walk away. Everybody wants to walk away and have no further damage,
I agree. I think this is a fascinating topic. I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking about it with me. And hopefully the listeners out there are getting some helpful information about what they should be thinking, whether they're contemplating posting or have received some negative reviews. They'll think twice about both in terms of how they respond to it. Do you have any final comments you want to share on this topic?
You know what, I would just say that people should remember that when they're online, they may think that they can be anonymous, but they're not, that the internet is set up so that there are fingerprints that are left behind. And that if you're a doctor and you have somebody that is abusing the privilege to post repetitively and maliciously, that there are things that you can do, and that you don't have to just take it, and you can't identify who these people are, and you can seek redress through the websites and through the court system if the people are being malicious and hurting your practice or your peace of mind. And, you know, we've been successful righting the wrongs in the past.
Great. Julia, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just to follow up on that, you know, doctors are professionals, and even though these comments can warrant a emotional reaction, to not react, maintain that professionalism, and call another professional, your lawyer, to see if you can deal with this outside of the realm of the public space.
That's great advice. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on this episode of the HealthLaw Hotspot. We hope you'll join us next time. You can also check out some of our other podcasts at healthlaw.ralaw.com. And you can reach out to any of us at any time. And we hope to hear from you and to see you next time. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Ericka.
The Roetzel HealthLaw Hotspot is made available by the firm and its attorneys for educational purposes and to provide general information, not to provide specific legal advice. Use of the Roetzel HealthLaw Hotspot does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the firm or any of its attorneys. The Roetzel HealthLaw Hotspot should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice, and you should contact an attorney in your state about any legal needs or questions you may have.